Okay, segmentation. So as you know, I like definitions. So in terms of segmentation for marketing purposes, you see what it says there. And this is the process of segmentation marketing. This really summarizes, let's just go back here. This really summarizes pretty much what we're talking about here in this whole lecture. So you divide the database into distinct groups or segments who have similar characteristics. You select promising segments to form target markets, places where you think you can get more business, and obviously your MVCs would be key. You might also want to take your LVCs, your least valuable customers, and have some policies towards them, which might involve some kind of price increases or charging for customer service if they don't hit certain purchase targets, those kinds of things. And then the point is that you reach out to each of the segments with its own, with communications that match the characteristics of the segment. And I'm just going to say here, this is somewhere on the spectrum between mass marketing and one-to-one marketing. One-to-one meaning I have distinct communications that are literally tailored for each individual customer. And I have a whole plan and a whole series of communications that happen to customers on an individual basis. So this is a balance between the two. I'm targeting, so I'm being smart, but I'm not, since doing one-to-one might be operationally overwhelming, I've elected to just go with segments. And most companies, for marketing purposes, really aggressive planned marketing purposes, won't pick more than 8 or 9 or 10 segments that they do plans for. And a smart company, by the way, will also put a manager in charge of each segment. And that manager will have goals, measurable goals for what the company wants to accomplish with that segment every year. And they'll have a plan to achieve the goals. They'll have a budget. They'll have a plan. And these things will be tracked and improved on. Best way to get something done in a company is put one person in charge of it. So now we get into some of our more esoteric discussions about what it is to take a whole thing and then divide it into parts. Because our natural inclination, unless we're eating an orange, is to put parts together to form something bigger. Obviously, that's what an orchestra is, for example, right, everyone? That's what teamwork is. That's why we were so successful at our planning session. If just one of us had tried to do all that planning by him or herself, it would have been nowhere near as effective and good as what we did together. So we typically think in terms of wholes and parts and dividing things, that the whole thing is better than the parts. Somehow putting parts together is a smart thing to do for the most part. And in fact, that's a definition of synergy. So when a company acquires other companies or other divisions, and somehow because of it, everything becomes better when the two are put together. Both are better than they were before. That's real synergy. And certainly for functionality, that's what we want. And again, here's the idea of teamwork, that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. We look at something like the European Union, which is essentially lots and lots of different countries Yet when they are put together, even though there are many faults, I guess, and issues with them all being together, they've certainly managed, in a business sense, in a marketing sense, to achieve some real economies. Dissolving internal borders or borders between countries, having one currency, um, things like that, have enabled the European Union to be greater than the sum of its parts. So our natural inclination is to want to form teams and orchestras and put things together and tackle projects. When does it make sense to do the opposite and pull things apart and have more success or create more value by pulling things apart? And that the sum of the parts is greater than the whole. Well, sometimes companies that are put together don't work very well. This happens quite a bit. For instance, AT&T, which you guys don't have a lot of experience with, has quite a history. American Telephone and Telegraph had a monopoly on all telephonic communications in the U.S. They owned everything. They sold the telephones. They handled all the lines. It was one big, huge company. They did all the product development. All the technological development was done in Bell Labs. And yet they were forced to divide up the company into different regional entities and different functional entities. Verizon is one of those entities, by the way. That was the AT&T that was in the Northeast. And actually, by dividing up the company and letting each part go off on its own and do things, they've actually ended up creating quite a lot of value for shareholders. The same can be said of a very bad merger, which was America Online was at one point the leading internet company way back before there was really broadband access. People were dialing up for access. AOL was the company that really invested a great deal of money in getting people to download software and open up online accounts and go on over their phones. Oh my God, that was a pain. But they merged with Time Warner. At the time, a very big magazine company. They also owned HBO. They had already merged with Warner Brothers Studios. So Time Warner, a very successful multimedia conglomerate, merged with AOL, and they never really found synergies. It was a bad merger. And they ended up being pulled apart, and each company has done very badly, as a matter of fact, by being divided up. But probably better than they would have done if they'd stayed together. And then, sort of near and dear to my heart, there are lots of what are called classic cars, older antique cars. This is a Volvo 1800, located who knows where. It looks like somewhere in New England. And it's been allowed to, maybe it's sitting out in the field or hasn't been protected and covered. It certainly hasn't been indoors. And it's rusted, and we're just looking at the front of it. It looks like it probably has a lot of problems. And so you can actually buy a whole car like that in the state it's in, not running, with lots of problems, for $500 or $600. And then what a lot of people do, have the energy, is they pull all the good parts out of the car and sell them as individual items. And here's a site on eBay where indeed this happens, where you see an original engine sold for $400. They're asking for $450. Bumpers are $400. A rear seat cushion, tan, they're asking $300. So by dividing up this beat up old car that you could buy for $600, you can actually create a lot of value. Not that they're going to get all their prices on that, but anyway. So that's another example of pulling things apart and creating value. By the way, that's my Volvo 1800. It's a 1966 S, and of course that's the rear end. It's not really running as it should be yet. I still have more work to do on it, but boy, that's been a long story. Another example of creating value by segmenting is let's take a cow, a beef cow. So I can buy the whole cow for a certain amount of money, and this is what meat processing companies do. And this becomes a kind of grisly, bloody thing to think about, which is one reason why a number of people are going vegan, in addition to environmental reasons. But when I have that whole cow, they're all of a sudden, by dividing it up, by segmenting it, and breaking it down into relevant parts, I can create more value. So, for example, those of you who are into beef, and I usually ask my classes to raise their hand if they like steak, and I'm surprised because I used to get about 80% of the hands go up. Well, those of you who like steak know that there are different cuts of steak, right? There are different kinds of steak. There's a filet mignon, there's a ribeye, bone in, there's New York strip steak. There are different cuts of beef, and in fact, this is kind of hard to read, but you get the idea that different parts of this animal are cut up by meat processors and butchers into different cuts of meat and sold for different amounts of money based on the tenderness and the flavor and the fat content and other important things. And by the way, and by doing that, you get more value from the beef cow than you would, from just the whole cow. But you have to go through the effort and the marketing, but it can be done. And by the way, different things are made from the hooves and the skin of the cow. Comes leather. And so pretty much every part of this animal is made use of somehow, economically. And for those of you who are vegetarians, we can divide a beet plant into the root, which is the beet. They're delicious. I love beets. And beet greens. Beet greens are very good cooked on their own, like a spinach or a kale or a Swiss chard. They're very good on their own. So lots of grocery stores, vegetable purveyors will divide them up. So you can segment a beet and also create maybe a little bit more value. So maybe this is a little easier for some of us to look at and think about than that poor cow. And this is really what we're talking about for our segmentation. And I did see this slide. One of your teams used this in your earlier presentations. I forget which one of you it was. This is really what we're talking about. It's taking a group of people, finding things in common between people, and separating them into discrete, separate, addressable segments. This is from a year or two ago, but Facebook has 52,000 segments. They've got the psychographics, the hobbies, the likes, the everything there to be able to divide just infinitely. And this, of course, is the secret to their success, is they take all that information that we gave them and they've used it to help advertisers target us. So I'm going to stop here for a minute and pick up on the other side.